started, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Todd here today to talk about some of the work that he's been doing in the US and potentially what he might be doing here in Australia as well. Todd's been here for the past couple of weeks, following up from a visit that he made last year to look at how he might be able to contribute to looking at our incarceration rates, our increasing incarceration rates, and what we might be able to do to reduce them. So he's going to obviously tell you a lot more about that. He's just stepped down as provost at Rutgers University, so now he has some time to get involved in new projects. As many of you would know, he's the author of about 12 books, author or co-author of about 12 books, and probably, I don't know how many journal articles, hundreds, let's just say hundreds. And he's also working in an area that I saw on the website is called effectiveness-based research and policy. So I kind of liked the sound of that because we talk a lot about evidence-based research, and he's talking about effectiveness-based research, which sounds even better, to be honest. So maybe you can tell us more about that at some point. Okay, I'll hand over to Todd now, and thank you very much for talking.
Thank you. So I'm really delighted to be here and have an opportunity. Thanks for how marvelously I've been hosted by several people around the room, and so I'll start by saying that, and I've said this in a couple of meetings already, that one of the genetic flaws of Americans is that they arrive in a country and in 15 minutes know everything there is to know about that country and are in a position to give you advice about how to live your life the rest of your life. I'll try to avoid that problem, but I am an American, so I do have it in my DNA. And to the extent I slide into it, you can just say, oh yes, well, he's ill. I'm going to talk about, let's see if this works. I'm going to talk about mass incarceration from a U.S. perspective, but I've been gathering some data, some people have given me data about Queensland, so I'll have some Queensland data in this talk as well. What I want to do is to talk about what I like to call the iron law of prison populations, which I'll explain in a minute. It's a phrase that Jim Austin and I coined, or maybe robbed from somebody. So this talk was originally going to be called Turning Points, but I really think it's about obeying the law. It's about understanding that if you want to do something about the number of people who are locked up in prison, you have to follow certain principles, and I'll try to explain what I mean by those. So obviously, most people in this room know about the Great American Punishment Experiment. The experiment has really important numbers at the beginning and at the end. In 1972, which was the first year that prison populations grew in the United States in a sustained way, there were 200,000 people incarcerated, about 100,000. That does not include people in jails. So in the US, we have people serving short sentences in jails or awaiting trial in jails. But also, these are people serving sentences having been sentenced by the court, 200,000. There are about another 120,000 people in jail. By 2010, that number had grown to 1.5 million people in prison serving sentences, another 700 and some thousand people in jail, so 2.2, roughly speaking, million people in 2010. So you can do the math, it's a big increase. When I give this talk in the US, I like to ask people if they were born after the year 1972, and I ask for a show of hands. I won't do that here. And because I like to explain to people that for them, this is an entirely normal experience. But in the history of the known universe, it's pretty abnormal. You know, it's only happened once, and it happened in the United States during this time period. So it's a unique idea. And calling it an experiment is a bad use of the word experiment. You know, usually when you have an experiment, you say, gee, let's give something a try, see how it works. We didn't do this with this idea. Let's try to increase by 8-fold the number of people we put in prison, or, you know, by 6-fold the rate that we put them there. Let's try to lead the world in incarceration and see how it works out. So we didn't do this as an experiment. But calling it an experiment has some other benefits, in my opinion, because when you do experiments, you think you're going to learn some lessons, and so it's useful to talk about what I think the American experience gives us as lessons as well. So since 2010, there's been a drop in the number of people incarcerated in the U.S. by about 5%. So 2010 to 11, there was a drop of about 1% in the national figures, and then from 2010, there's been a couple of ups and a couple of downs, but overall, since the peak in 2010, the peak incarceration rate, we've had about a 5% drop. 3/4 of the states have had some drops since their peak year. Some states, the peak year was 1999. That's actually my state, New Jersey, is one of those 2 states that had that peak year, also in the state of New York. Other states, about 20 states had their peak before 2010. There are actually 6 states that have reduced their prison populations by more than 1/4, of which my state is one, New Jersey. And there are another dozen states or so that have not yet reached their peak, or at least this year is the highest that they've had. I think it's useful to say that because one of the things about incarceration, and when you tell the sort of the great American incarceration experiment, acts as though it's one big thing, but it's really 50 different stories, and those 50 different stories happen over different periods of time in those different places. I'm going to talk about it as one big thing because it's kind of useful, and there are certainly themes that are national themes, but in Australia, there's not one story either, right? There's a story of each of the states and territories has its own story because it has its own policies producing its own prison population. So in the 1970s, most of the increase in the number of people incarcerated happened as a result of increases in crime and increases in the number of people being sent to prison. In the 1980s, we started restricting the rate of incarceration, restricting the availability of prison for people, probation for people. I think the jet lag is finally hitting you. Increasing the availability of prison for people and restricting the availability of probation for people. I'll talk about the beginning and ending numbers there. In the 1990s, roughly speaking, we started working on length of stay, increasing sentences, particularly for people who were convicted of recidivism statutes. And in the 1990s, there was also a small increase in the rate of people returning to prison who had been to prison once or more in their lives. And this is the chart of the way it works. The red line is the incarceration rate in the United States. This is 1930. This is 2015. The red line is incarceration rate. So in 1971 there was this start, and from 71 through 2000 through about 2000 there was this sustained increase in the number of people locked up in the United States. And it looks like it's almost a uniform change. There are a couple of different periods in there, but it's actually pretty uniform. What's also interesting is that around 2000 and or so, it starts to level off. It peaks in 2010, and it's been dropping, roughly speaking, very slowly dropping ever since. So something happens around 2000, and then something again seems to happen at around 2010. A couple of other things that are interesting about this graph is that this is the crime rate over that same time period. And what you see is that the big increase in crime happened, roughly speaking, before we started changing the incarceration policies. And then we started changing incarceration policies, and crime rates stayed roughly the same. So we didn't get this, hey, we're going to change crime, we're going to change incarceration policies, crime is going to drop. And then during this time period where crime rates have been dropping substantially, incarceration rates have been, roughly speaking, compared to the entire duration, roughly speaking, stable. And so if you want to make an argument about the relationship on the large basis in the United States between the number of people locked up in prison and the crime rate, you can make any argument you want in any 10-year slice in this time series. So you can talk about, look, if you don't increase your crime rate, your incarceration rate, crime will go up. If you increase your crime, the incarceration rate is directly related to the crime rate because you get more people locked up. You want to decrease your crime rate, just lock more people up. So the point is, if the question is, what do you want to do with incarceration in order to affect crime? The answer is anything you want. Just pick out a slice of time, and you will have the data you need to make that argument. This is Queensland incarceration numbers going back to 1980s. The time series is not as long. And what you see here is that there's, roughly speaking, stability, then a big increase from the 90s. You probably know these data better than me, to the late 90s or throughout the 90s. Then again, rough stability from the late 90s until about 2012, and then this skyrocketing increase after 2012. This is crimes reported to the police from 1997 through 2015. And what you see is that crimes going up, starts dropping around 2000 and drops by, roughly speaking, about, almost a fourth or a third till about 2014 or 13, and then it looks like it's starting to go up again. That's a worldwide dropping crime phenomenon in English-speaking countries. Everywhere experienced it. And so this is what happens when you take that crime rate and drop it into different types of crimes. What's interesting here is this green graph is crimes against persons. And what you see is that one of the problems with graphs like this is that rare events don't look like they change very much. So this actually, it starts off, goes up a little bit, and it comes down a little bit. But the change in proportion to other kinds of crime is not that great. What you've got here really is this increase in drug-related crimes and this increase in other crimes, including drugs in there. But what actually is happening is that crimes are actually decreasing during this time period. And this maps the incarceration rate and the crime rate in Queensland. And what you see is that if you tell this story, there's a period of time when they both go up. There's a period of time when imprisonment rate is very stable and crime rates are dropping. Then there's a period of time when crime rates are roughly stable and incarceration rates are increasing. And again, so you want to make any argument you want to make about the relationship, about what you've got to do about crime using imprisonment, you can do it from this chart. Just make sure you pick the right years. So now let's talk about the iron law of prison populations. So in the United States, there's this change that's been happening about incarceration has produced a new conversation. And one of the reasons I was interested in Australia is I have the feeling that it feels like that conversation is also changing here. Could be wrong. It could be just my ears. I'm an optimist by nature. But it felt like some of the stuff that was going on in the way people were talking about incarceration policy was starting to change here. So in the United States, people started talking about bringing down the incarceration numbers for a host of reasons we might get into in the Q&A. But most of the policy debate missed the point about how you bring those numbers down. So, so Jim and I developed this idea of the iron law of prison populations, and the prison population is entirely produced by how many people go to prison and how long they stay there. And everything else is noise. And that's pretty simple. And it's so simple that you can miss the point because you end up talking about anger management programs or getting people off drugs or putting people in, keeping families together or family resettlement or whatever. But unless it relates to one of those two numbers, it doesn't have anything to do with mass incarceration of a number of people. Now, it turns out the rate of return to prison is also important, and I'll talk about that. But that's really just simply a sub-number of the first number. And it contains both the first number and the second number in it as a policy. But it's worth talking about separately because we often think about it as an important dynamic. It turns out mathematically it's often pretty important. So that's the iron law of prison populations. Prison populations are entirely produced by how many people you put in prison and how long they stay. It's like a hotel. If you want to fill a hotel, you can do it in a couple of different ways. You have a lot of people come in or you can have some people come in and stay a long time. But if you want to get space in your hotel and you have a person who's going to stay a day and they choose not to stay, that doesn't change what's happening in your hotel very much, right? But if you have somebody who's going to stay a month and they change their minds and they go away, that changes the hotel for a while. If you have a conference that was going to be mounted and then some of the people cancel the conference, that changes your hotel. But if the conference was only 3 days, that only changes your hotel for 3 days. Right? It doesn't change your hotel in the long term. So it really is just exactly like a hotel. Short stays compared to long stays matter. How many return customers you get also matter. And people who run hotels pay a lot of attention to what keeps those hotels full, because when they keep the hotels full, they make money. So I know that seems like an awkward metaphor, but I think it's actually more true than this is a made-up example to just show you how important those two different numbers are. So this is a hypothetical 100 people going in, 100%, 1,000 people going in, 5% of the extremely serious people are convicted of extremely serious felony, 10% of very serious, 20% of serious, half less than serious. This is pretty reasonable numbers, right? And 15% not serious at all. You know, what happens is you get people who do things that just stuck, they just do it so often, you get tired of them and you just send them to prison, right? So these are, this is how this would translate for 1,000 people into prison admissions at those rates. If you had 1,000 people convicted in a year as your cohort, this is how many people would end up in prison, 495 with those rates. And then I just estimated the length of stay. So for extremely serious, in the United States, we really treat time as time. You're kind of maybe here. So I'm saying 15 years, let's say, for the very serious. That's really not actually that unusual. You'll see some data in a minute. Very serious get 5 years. The less serious get about 6 years. I'm sorry, this is 12 years, right? Yeah, 12 years, 6 years, and so on. So here, the average length of stay here, this is months, I'm sorry, is 21 months, which maps, roughly speaking, onto what average length of stay is in the United States, roughly speaking. So what you'll do here is, if you play this cohort out, you get this cohort every year for 15 years, you end up with this prison population, of which 750 of the 1,750 are in for extremely serious crimes. So what you see here is you can say, look, we're not going to get much reform by focusing on only 5 out of 1,000 people walking in every, right? These are the customers, but these are your customers who are going to be there a long time. If you can change how much of your hotel space they're going to use, you actually free up some hotel space. If you're trying to reduce your prison population, we tend to focus on these numbers, on entry cohorts. We tend to think of them as being very important. It turns out they're quite important because the streams coming in matter. But the way you get a prison population to change, the average daily population to change, is by changing this set of people, right? And so for every person here that you pull out, it's a very small number in terms of your entry decision making, but it's a very big number in terms of your average stay. Does that make any sense? And this is a mistake that people often make in the prison business. This is a graph of prison populations and admission rates in the United States from 1978, roughly speaking, going back almost to the beginning of the Great Experiment, to 2014. And what you see is that admissions start to level off around 2000, and they actually start to tail. But the prison population itself, nationally, continues to rise. Knowing what you know now about the iron law prison populations, you can answer the question, how can that be? How can we be putting fewer people in prison and yet we still have more people in prison? The answer is obviously the other variable, right? Length of stay. And length of stay is produced by the way, we had 200,000 people locked up in 1972. We now have 266,000 people serving life sentences. So we have 1972's prison population as lifetime hotel residents. And that's how you can get this, because nobody's coming in, but the people who are in there are not going out. This is the actual data for the United States, one of the year, 2015. So the prison population, slightly more than half of the prison population is there for violent crime. But they're less than, right about a fourth of all prison admissions. Whereas if you look at, let's find drugs on here, where's drugs? Drugs are 28% of admissions, but they're only 70% of the average daily population. We have a lot of conversation in the United States about doing something about drug laws, and we should. We're stupid about drugs. We are confifi. And that's not a category, is it? So we should change our drug laws, in my personal opinion. But I'll explain it. That's on tape now too. It's perfect. But the reason we should do it is not to try to do something about mass incarceration, because it'll have minimal impact on mass incarceration. So that just shows you some of the dynamics. So for example, for sexual assault, these are 1 out of 20 people locked up. In some states, it's as high as 1 out of 3. but they're 1% in this database of those who enter.
Can I just interrupt and ask,
Sure.
if you added the jail population, would that look differently in terms of the offences?
Jail populations, as you know, are two different groups. They are people serving very short sentences on crimes. The median, I forgot to say this, the median length of stay in 1972 was 15 months. It is now 30 months. And in 1972, 3/4 of the people sentenced for felony got probation. Now 1/4 get probation. So that's the bookends of the experiment. In the context of jail, what has happened has been that jail stays have gone from a median of about 30 days to a median of about 60 days. Yeah, but they are the same array, but they're much more heavily sampling non-violent, non-drug crimes, because drug crimes tend to either not go to jail at all or go to prison, but they don't stay in jail. What the jail issue is much more around substance abuse, which is people who have addiction problems and are floating through the system repeatedly because they get caught breaking into apartments and that kind of thing. So this will just show you about the impact of the big prison experiment in the United States. In 1980, 6 out of 10, 2 out of 3, 4 out of 6, I don't know where you get it, but 6 out of 10 were violent. And then we started locking up drug offenders, and most of the changes were around drugs, and it went to less than half. But then we started making people stay longer who committed violent crimes, and then we're back up to 54%. What happened to drugs is very interesting. We changed drug policy. It used to be almost all people convicted of drug crimes went on to probation. We then took probation away as an option for most judges. We went up to 1/5 of the prison population on any given day in for drugs, and now it's dropping again. But it's not dropping because we're putting fewer people in prison for drugs. It's dropping because people who are going in for prison for other things are staying longer, occupying more hotel space, right? And then what's happened to property offenses have been that because of this mix, they were very high. Because we've not done as much sentencing reform around property offenses, they've systematically become less of the daily population. So when you hear in the United States statistic about non-serious first-time property offenders and drug offenders, you realize that we're talking about a minority of the entire prison population. We're not going to be able to do anything about mass incarceration unless we face up to our responsibility to change the way we treat people convicted of violent crimes, which I can talk about. So this is the number of cleared offenses in Queensland. This is cleared offenses. So I don't have an arrest measure in my data that I was given, which is a body count, right? The number of people arrested. This is close enough to it. This is the number of crimes that were cleared by an arrest or some other mechanism. It isn't one for one, but if the policies of clearance are the same in 97 as they were in 15, the proportions are roughly reasonable. So this looks like it's roughly stable, and that looks like it's roughly stable, but that's misleading because it starts out at 2,000 and ends up almost 3,000. So an almost 50% increase in the number of crimes against a person cleared by police procedures, probably an arrest, right? And this goes from 7,000 up to about 95,000, which is, again, almost 1/3 of an increase. So those numbers, the numbers of bodies being pumped through the system may be going up very substantially. That's not a body count, but if it is a body count, you can see that since 1996, the numbers have been increasing. But this is a daily, so going back, this is numbers coming in, this is an admission cohort measure, right? This is a daily population measure, the other measure, stock population. And what you see here is the red number is unsentenced people, and the blue number is sentenced people, and that tells its own story, right? Since June 2012, they were both increasing at roughly the same kind of rate, and then something happens around 2014, and for 3 years, unsentenced people dramatically shoot up, and sentenced people are roughly speaking stable. By the way, this is 16, we're about here. We don't know what this looks like out here, and our automatic science, the social science idea of looking at a table like this is that it looks like this, so it just goes like this, but it may not look like that, right? We don't know what it's going to look like. It could be a confetti. The best word going, right? So this is prisoners in custody by return from parole. I spent about an hour and a half with Rebecca, trying to figure out, where are you, Rebecca? There you are. We're trying to figure out what this all meant, and I acted like I understood it. I'm not a good actor. But this table is really powerful because this is the line here that really changes, right? So this orange line, which corresponds to sentenced, parole suspension, or failed parole in episode, whatever that means. I'm sure people in the room know what it means other than me, but whatever that means, that's the thing that changed. Everything else is roughly speaking, not a problem. The blue line drops for a while and then stabilize that. The blue line is sentenced, current parole, not suspension. So there's some policy thing going on here producing that third dynamic, which is returns once released, right? Changing the way that is. So this is sentence length information. It looks a little bit like my first apartment when I had rented in Albany after my 5-year-old and 3-year-old finished with the crayons on the wall. It's supposed to be fun, but anyway. So what's interesting here is, again, there's the non-sentence. But this purple line here is 12 months to 3 years, which is a pretty widespread and is on the upper end of your data, and it looks like it systematically increases across the time series. And then the other one is here, this is 5 to 10 years. So these are people who are going to be around for a while, right? So it doesn't look like it's that much of a change, but it's actually, at least 3 times the size of the impact on an average daily population of this purple group. So if you want to understand its impact, just sort of triple it visually, and you'll see that that's a group here that you're getting a lot of impact on average daily population from. The green line is up to 12 months. It grows quickly and then stabilizes, and on. So this is what purple haze sounds like on when you play it. Anyway, this is the red is unsentenced admissions, and the blue is sentenced admissions. And what you can see that the blue trends up and the red trends up. So you're getting both impacts are happening at the admission stage. You're having increases in both sentenced and unsentenced. This is what would naturally happen from an increase in unsentenced people, is that you would have a slight reduction in average length of stay, but an increase in the number of people going. If you are putting less serious people in more frequently, you will, by definition, reduce average length of stay of those people. Right? So that's an understandable graph. So I'm going to talk about some work that Jim Austin and I are involved in Illinois, because it illustrates how the iron law can be used to think about incarceration policy. The peak year for incarceration in Illinois was 2013. And since that time, they've had about a 6% drop in the number of people incarcerated without any kind of policy changes. It turns out that the most important thing you can do right now in the United States is nothing. You can do nothing. If you just get away with doing nothing, things will start to sort themselves out. The governor, who is a Republican governor, set a goal of a 25% reduction, set up a commission. The commission is all the suspects you'd ordinarily think. It has lawyers and citizens and victims and social service providers and so on. And they came up with a report, and their report, let me back up for a second. Their report recommended a whole bunch of things about treatment programs and drug courts and a bunch of other stuff. And somebody gave Jim Austin and me a copy of the report, and he said, well, this is a very nice set of things to do, but it's not going to have much to do with incarceration rates in Illinois. It's not going to get you 25% reduction, that's for sure. And they said, why? And so we started working with them. And so I'm going to show you sort of some of the Illinois data that comes from that. So this is Illinois prison admissions and prison population 85 through 16. And what you can see is that the prison admissions start to tail off around 2005. So they're a few years later than the rest of the United States. But incarceration, the number of people incarcerated stays roughly stable for that time period. Knowing the iron law, we now know, and I'll take the exam, that means it's a length of stay issue, right? So this is another interesting graph, which is prison releases and length of stay. Blue is length of stay, and orange here, or red I guess it is prison releases. So if you don't put anybody in prison and release everybody, after a while you'll have nobody in prison. So I know that's a very miraculous kind of observation, but it's like a hotel. If you don't let anybody check into your hotel, and you let people check out when they're ready to check out, soon enough you're going to have an empty hotel, which is the way it works. So here's what's happening is prison releases for all this period of time from 85 through about 2000, prison releases are really increasing. They're pumping people out. This is a time period in the United States when there's a lot of conversation about reentry. not surprisingly. And what's happening is the prison, the length of stay is actually decreasing. So how can you have the number of people being released more rapidly, and at the same time length of stay dropping? You're letting out people who have the shorter sentences, right? They're pumping through your system more rapidly. Which is, by the way, all the people that they want to do all the reforms on. The 7 people in the United States who are serving time for having been convicted of marijuana with no other prior convictions, that's how we're going to end mass incarceration. We're going to lock up any of them. So that was very funny what I just said. The delivery was off. So, and then what happens is that the prison releases begin to stable off because you got all the sort of short-termers out. Or at least that thing is being stabilized, particularly around drug policy in Illinois, and length of stay starts to increase of the people being released. And it's not because length of stay is increasing, it's just the release cohort is changing what it looks like. And the nice guys who you all wanted to have living next to you, they've already been released, and the bad guys you're all afraid of and the newspapers don't want to talk about, they're all sitting there going to parole board hearings. This is an unreadable chart, but I'll try to help you a little bit. So felonies in Illinois are divided into classes. There's several different classes of felonies. Class 4 is the least serious. Class 1 is the most serious. Class S is a special category. So if you committed a crime and you had a gun, or if you committed a crime and you had a prior version of that crime, you can be committed Class X. Illinois was one of the states that passed truth in sentencing under Bill Clinton in 1990 in the Clinton Crime Control Act of '94. So they've got some people serving truth in sentencing. So you got 7% of the people coming in on those, and they are occupying. Oh, it's not in here. I was going to. I might have it later. Tells you what proportion of the prison population they are. So there are not a lot of people coming in, but they are really going to occupy time because they're going to serve 131 months compared to these guys serving 21 months. By the way, the 21 months there is misleading because in Illinois you get credit for the times you serve awaiting your sentence, and for many of them, that's everything. So 21 months minus the good time, minus your time in jail, you're sentenced to 2 years, and then they shake your hand and off you go. The probation. So, so this is the average sentence admission time. This is the average sentence at the release time. So this is the average jail time that's figured in. So this is what they're actually going to do. So for these truth and sentencing guys, they're going to do about 47 months on the average. That's a median mathematical average. Whereas the class 4 guys, of which there are quite a few, 6,000 of the 3,000, they're going to serve 7 months. Any prison administrator will tell you that 7 months is not long enough to even sort of classify a person. Get them into, there's no program you really do with them. There's nothing. I mean, they have a release date that they're working on before you have got them through the battery of tests. Right? So we use the word churning. I don't like that word very much because it sounds like sharks. What sharks do. So, but anyway, that's the term that's used often. So that's the current system. They're wanting to reduce this number here, by 4. So this is what we recommended. We recommended 3 front-end changes and 1 length of stay change. The 3 front-end changes all had to do with how much time violators of rules serve. So there's 2 versions there. One is not letting them serve any time at all. So you just simply say, we're going to divert you. If we were going to put you back in jail for 6 months anyway, why not just not do it? All right? And then you get savings. And you get savings of 1,435 months on that population from that. And then if it's a serious thing and you're going to be back and violated in one of the more serious categories, let's restrict how long you can go back. So those guys will go back for 15 months and 18 months. Let's just cap it at 6 months, and then you get some savings there. Then you change how much good time. This is something you folks I don't think have here, earned good time inside. So a very common thing. It was invented in the 60s and 70s, and a lot of places just kept it, which is if you don't get written up for an infraction while you're incarcerated, for every 5 days you do, we give you a day off the end of your sentence. So it's a way of rewarding you for not engaging in a crime while inside the prison. Now the other half of that policy is if you do engage in a bad thing, We might give it to you anyway because we're so crowded and we want to get you out of here. But we estimated increasing the amount of credits they can serve at each level, with the highest levels being able to serve these credits. These guys, like this Class X people, their average age is like 55. Get them out, right? So, and then there's a risk function, and then there's a limitation on how long you can serve on a technical revocation, what you call reach, and this is what it estimates. It estimates a reduction of people coming back within 5 years of 34,000 months. And this is what it looks like when you math it out. So our projections, all else being equal, were that the 6% drop that they had experienced was over, because they now had people they were not putting people in who were going to be rapidly turning around, but they were putting people in who were going to be looking at longer terms. And this is what our projections look like over time, assuming stable prime rate and assuming no other changes. And this is what their projections look like if they add those 4 policy changes. So, the nice thing about this model is that we started here. We didn't actually start here. It looks like we started here. We said, the governor said, you want to do 25%. That's what we're going to get you to. Nobody wants to limit bad guys who are committing misbehaviors while they're on parole supervision to 6 months. Nobody wants to do that. You wouldn't start off by saying, well, what if we did 6 months? That sounds about right. You got to that number because you say, unless you do that, you're not going to get to 25%. You start with the thing you want to get, and then you start saying, these are the package of options. If I go back here, by the way, I can change this around because I'm trying to get to that number there. I can increase this, decrease that. I can move it around. But I'm now trying to get to a number. I'm trying to get a budget done, and I'm trying to get to that 32,000. So their report actually incorporated all those recommendations. So it's a good thing I'm a tenured university professor, because I could get fired for anything that happens in Illinois. So, what are the takeaways here? And then we'll do some Q&A. And when I did takeaway, I thought, well, that's a term I would use if I were talking to a bunch of Americans. And I thought, well, this is pretty good, because this is something you all can chew on. Thank you very much. I'm here all week. Make sure you so, one, the most frequent crimes are the ones you often want to deal with, because they're also the least serious, but they're not going to get you nearly as much as you think you will. Oh, look at all those drug guys. Half of the people who go into the prison system in Ohio serve less than a year. So it turns out something like 30% of the people going in Illinois serve less than 9 months. You just can't do much. You got to do a lot with every one of them. They're all coming back anyway. These guys their lives are messed up. You're not, unless you do something around substance abuse, they're coming back, and if you do something around substance abuse, they come back anyway. So the most frequent crimes aren't going to get you very far. Let me be very, very clear. I'm not arguing against correctional programs. We have a moral, ethical, and personal interest right in making sure that the highest quality programs are made available to people we decide to take away their freedom. There's no other human deal on the table that ought to be on the table. But that is not the way to deal with mass incarceration. That is the way to deal with the fact that you're taking people's freedom away, and that you shouldn't do anything other than that. But you shouldn't, if your job is mass incarceration, you're not done when you've done good correctional programming. You haven't even started yet. The second takeaway is that multiple streams make things more complicated, but they also make it more subtle. Now, Illinois looked complicated with those 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the X, and the violent, and the murder. They had a separate category for felony murder. So they were all, that was simple compared to what you guys have. I still don't understand it. I spent an hour and a half trying to get the language down. So you've got lots of different streams coming in lots of different ways, and they're behaving very differently. Remember those charts? Some things are going up like this, and some are going down. So there's a lot of stuff happening in those streams, and it's a good news. It's a bad news in that if you change one of them, it might be fully compensated by changes in the other. So it makes it complicated. On the other hand, it makes it much more doable, because you have so many streams, different kinds of things are available. You don't have to just simply say we're going to reduce sentences for people who hurt people by 20%. There's a lot of ways you can get at this iron law problem that you've got here, which is a real advantage. Now, the disadvantage for someone like me is I don't understand it well enough to be able to give any advice about it, but that doesn't mean I wouldn't give any advice about it. The third thing, and I'm going to say something about this, don't be afraid of tackling violence and length of stay. So people who serve time for violent crimes represent two kinds of risk. They represent a risk of hurting people again, and then they represent a risk of hurting the system. And we often act as though we're concerned about the risk of them hurting people again and how we are treating them, and what we're really concerned about is the risk of them hurting the system. You just had an experience right now. So this report came out about the siege in Sydney, and they were all yelling because this guy had been in the system before and had been let go, right? And that doesn't change at all the likelihood of you being a victim of a terrorist act, right? But that does change tremendously the odds of a person who runs a government agency being a victim of a terrorist act. But it turns out that this is Shad Maroon, one of my favorite lines from Shad Maroon. We were sitting around a policy table with, mayors and a couple of statewide folks, and they were talking about reentry in New Jersey. He had just become dean, and people were going around, and he said, to date, we don't know of anything that works better than turning 35. And that is such a profound thing, really. So the largest growing age group in the U.S. prison system is 45 and over. It's growing twice as rapidly as any other age group, right? So we are not taking advantage of what we know. So people who serve time for violent crimes have low rearrest rates on the average. They have low rearrest rates for violent crimes on the average. They have, and they tend to be older on the average. And as a result, when they are released, they have very high success rates on the average. That doesn't mean across the board. The risk is a real word, right? It's not determinative. This came home to me. We have, Rutgers has a large in-prison college program. We have about 600 people studying it. And if they finish their sentences before they finish their degrees, they come out, and we admit them as Rutgers students onto the Rutgers campus. We have 60 or 70 people right now studying on campus. Very proud of this program. And we were meeting in a meeting with Senator Cory Booker's staff around what to do about reentry, because he's very interested in reentry. And the meeting went very well, and everybody was very moved, as you would be when you're surrounded by a group of people who have these life stories. And then the aide said, "Was there anything else you'd like to say?" And one guy, the president of the student association of this group, said, I admire Senator Booker, at that time President Obama, more than you could possibly imagine. They are leaders who have really made a difference in my life, but they're making a mistake. And the mistake they're making is they're saying that these are reforms for nonviolent offenders. These are reforms for drug offenders. And there were 15 students sitting around the table. He said, "I'd like for every student here who told their story, who was sentenced and did time for a crime that the state of New Jersey called a violent crime, to raise your hand." Every hand went up over line. And it was that moment for me that I realized, I don't even believe it. I say it, but I don't believe it. But you can really, the kinds of things you accomplish with people who have one violent thing in their past and have been paying a price for it for a long time. I mean, the way one of the students likes to say it is, imagine being known only for the worst day of your life. Right? Imagine that being your life. So we can do a lot more on the basis of risk, on the basis of justice, on the basis of self-interest, and on the basis of investing in the future with people who have been convicted of violent crimes. We don't have to be afraid of them as a group. I actually feel very strongly about that, and if we end up doing Q&A about that, I'd be happy to do some more. And then the final thing is, in the one presentation I'm making to the Sentence Advisory Commission, it doesn't say forget about it. It says de-emphasize, because I'm not stupid. But I might become Feffy. But I'm going to say it here, forget about those programs for mass incarceration. They don't relate to the iron law. They just don't relate to the iron law. You'll be attracted to them because they make you feel better. They should make you feel better. Offering education to people who or deprived of education or incarcerated is the only moral stance a human being can take. You know, helping people who have problems with with controlling their anger to find ways and learn techniques to control that, it's absolutely in your interest and in mine, and the only moral thing a person can do. Health care, on and on and on. But it doesn't relate to how many people go to prison and how long they stay. You can't get, it doesn't matter how good your reentry programs are, you can't get to reentry without entry. So, if you want to do something about mass incarceration, and you're tempted to start talking about drug courts, catch yourself. Incarceration, prison populations are produced by how many people go there and how long they stay. And the rest is noise. All right, thanks. It's Q&A now.
Yeah, we've got about 10 minutes for questions.
Thanks for your amazing amount of data. I have two questions. The first is more technical, the second is less technical. On those charts, comparing the crime rate to the imprisonment rate, what were you measuring as the crime rate?
So that's uniform
Queensland
crime.
and US. I couldn't figure out whether it was crimes reported to the police, because then you were talking about
It's
that.
all uniform crime, all the Part 1 uniform crime
All
reports. It's just UCR, it's just straightforward UCR.
So UCR, not arrest data, but UCR crimes reported to the
Correct.
police, because of course drugs is not in there, and that's why it's important to be clear about what you're looking at.
Absolutely.
The second is that I agree with your general ideas. It's just that what happens in Illinois and what happens elsewhere in terms of the political fallout of the sorts of things you're suggesting, because it seems to me that so much in the US in particular has this edge of, you know, put them in jail and throw away the key. So how does, for example, shorter stay for violent offenses, how does that all play out politically when you present this?
So I think it's a very complicated thing. It's place specific. So different places have different stories.
Yeah.
So the highest drop in incarceration rates is in the state of New Jersey. Since 1999, we had a more than 1/3 drop in the number of people in prison. And the way we did that was nothing. We just literally haven't passed any laws.
That's what I was going to ask you. What do you mean by doing nothing?
Just, I mean, pass any laws. Like some girl has not been killed and we decided to name a
I
law after her.
understand.
Right? White girl, by the way. It's never black. But we have Republican governors in 2/3 of the state houses, and almost all of them are interested in trying to reduce the number of people in prison. And the cool thing about what I'm trying to say is that if you are actually, that's what you want to do, this is what you have to do. You can talk about a lot of other things. It's like if I go to a doctor and I say, I want to get healthier, and the doctor says, well, then eat better and exercise. No, I want to be able to eat ice cream and sit on my couch and watch rugby and, get healthier. I'm sorry, those don't go together. And so I think that the dynamic is such that the ground is different. The other thing that I think is really interesting is people, present White House craziness aside, the sort of lipid historical story that we all are living with. People aren't getting elected anymore in the U.S. tough on crime, right? So, in fact, the mayor of Philadelphia was a former prosecutor who got elected on getting sensible about crime and stopping putting drug offenders and frisking young black men on the street and stopping, so I think that there's that. And then there's the California story, which I was going to do a little bit about it, but I took it out because it was only too long. So 40,000 people have gone from the California prison system into something else. Now, about 1/3 of them have gone to jails and some of them on probation. A lot of stuff about it, very complicated what's happened. But 40,000 people out of the prison system. And as best we can tell, the public safety effect has been a slight increase in auto thefts. So the truth that you can release a lot. So, and since we know prison doesn't affect, you really got me going, sorry. So since we know that prison doesn't affect your likelihood of committing crimes anyway, once you go to prison, then you got a pretty fixed likelihood of coming out, and we're not going to change it very much. that if I leave out 6 months earlier, I'm only changing the date of any likely misbehavior by 6 months. So I'm moving it around in time, but if you stretch the time out, I'm not changing the actual number. And that's the California story. So, I honestly think the conversation in the US has changed. I don't think it's very sophisticated yet, but maybe political conversations just aren't. And that's, by the way, what I'm going to say to the council later this afternoon. Hope I'm right, yeah.
One of the big challenges for the Australian system is the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in prisons. Now, and I'm not sure I'm going to get this out right. I mean, my understanding, I mean, when we talk about mass incarceration, we really are only talking about the incarceration of our Indigenous people, not our non-Indigenous people. And we actually incarcerate our Indigenous people at higher rates than you incarcerate Black Americans.
Anybody.
Yeah, and we incarcerate our non-Indigenous people at like
European rates.
Yeah, not
Except
like
in the Northern Territory. Northern Territory has high incarceration for non-Indigenous.
Right.
It's just one exception, but it's true otherwise.
So, have you thought about this? I mean, in your simple laws, how will that play out in the Australian system?
So I think it's about, one of the reasons why I'm interested in coming here and doing this work is that set of questions, because I don't think it's a known, there's no really knowable answer. I think there are probably some advantages to having, a naive person
Yeah, I
looking
think
at it.
lots
right?
of advantages.
I should not do what I ought to do, so I'm going to do it. I think oftentimes your choices here will be between doing nothing and doing something that doesn't do very much. If you want to bring the incarceration numbers down. And it's going to be very hard because doing nothing in the face of a problem is almost never an option that anybody wants to choose. So that's just an aside. I think it is absolutely. So our differential incarceration rates based on proportion of population, about 6 to 1 for African Americans, about 1.1, almost under 2 to 1 for people, Latinos. That's not even close to what you guys have. You're not even within spitting distance. So I don't know, and I think it's one of the most important questions. And it means that everything I just did has to be done with that ethnic piece separately for whites and for indigenous people and non-indigenous people, I think. And I'm impressed by how sensitive these issues are here. I think talking about them will be very difficult because of the history and because of what's at stake. But I think it's part of the reason it's such an interesting and important problem. So, did I not answer your question?
Yeah, that didn't answer it at all, but I've been working in the field for 25 years, I haven't been able to answer, so I can't remember why I thought that you had the answer.
It's a sub-piece of the larger puzzle.
Yeah.
But it's probably a sub-piece that drives the whole puzzle.
But I think one thing about having federated countries, and Australia is a good example, is that some states have a pretty low disproportionality and a low imprisonment rate, and other states have a very high one. So what can we learn from the low states? Why can't those policies be emulated elsewhere? So there's obviously something at the social structural level, at the state, that's creating this. It's not just indigenous and non-indigenous, it's something at the state level, the societal level, which is quite important to bear in mind. It's not just hotel space, it's about how the real estate is developed in the first instance.
I think that's, Kathy, I think that's absolutely right. But so let me say that the advantage of the iron law is that the reason you're getting these big differences is that in some places they're not sending as many people there, or they're not sending them for as long, or both. And then you start to say, well, what does that look like? Right. So, but I agree with you. And if we do something here, we're going to. New South Wales is going to put data on the table as well. We'll try to look at both states. But I think one of the territories would be useful to have. Although how good the data are, I don't know. Maybe I don't know. John. I don't know. But I'm a big believer in looking beyond one place.
Okay, yeah.
For those reasons.
With a question.
I'm sorry.
Hi. I'm curious, one of the ways that we could reduced length of stay in the United States is really addressing parole boards, especially since parole is still usually regulated by parole boards for violent offenders. So besides doing nothing, which is really interesting, are there ideas that you have for reforming parole boards within the United States? Because jumping back to what Kathy said, I mean, they're hugely political bodies as well, and that creates its own set of difficulties.
Right, so parole is increasingly becoming less of a factor in the US partly because parole is being eliminated in some places, so about 2/3 of the states now have parole instead of almost all. And then parole has taken itself out of the picture. So in New Jersey, for example, the rate of first eligibility, yes, is 8%. And the New Jersey Parole Board has a practice of giving you a parole date within 6 months of your maximum release date. And if you take the parole date, you're under parole supervision for 3 years. And if you wait it out, you get 6 months minus a little bit more good time, and then you walk away with no parole supervision. And so they get to say, look, we give everybody a parole date, they just say no. And so I think there's a lot you can do there. The 3 things that I've seen that are interesting, and again, I think in parole in particular, you have to look at each state separately, because each state's practice is different, right? The 3 things I've seen are from the age of 45 on, annual parole hearings, so that once a person's reached a risk neutral age, parole hearings should be scheduled. A second is not being able to set them for more than a year. And a third is presumption of release on the first parole eligibility date, so that the parole board has to give testable reasons why a parole wasn't given on the first eligibility date. The other thing I've seen is there are 2 things you can do. One of them is in the Illinois data. If you restrict the length of supervision, pro supervision, to a smaller period of time, to reduce the flow back for technical revocation for breaches. The second is that if you restrict the use of incarceration for those technical revocations, you get another hit. So in some data we did about 10 years ago, we could have reduced the prison population. If you could say that nobody goes back to prison for a parole failure that is not a new arrest, and when you go back, you don't go back for more than 6 months, we could have reduced the prison population. With just those 2 things, we could reduce the national prison population by about 25%.
Curious, what's the role, and you probably know this, what's the role of the private prison lobby in these conversations? Because that's one thing that's changed a lot over that time, is the increase in the private prison industry. And they obviously don't have.
I think that's also very state specific. So a place like Arizona, for example, they basically run the show. I forget what the number is, but it's a small number. It's like 8% or 12% of the people incarcerated are in a private prison. It's a small portion of that figure. The problem is that the state owes, in terms of the contract, the state owes them those bodies,
Right.
and can't restrict them. More problematic is the creation of a lobby group that has its
That's what
long-term
I'm thinking
financial interests.
Exactly.
Like,
That's like, what's their role in the conversation, less there, yeah.
So anybody who thinks they want to reduce prison costs at a state level by creating a lobby for more prisons is just silly.
Yeah.
Just dumb. But I don't think, so I'm talking more to answer, because I don't think it's been that big numerically.
Okay.
I think symbolically it's been big.
Yeah.
My other question, sorry to,
Yep.
is your unsentenced population in the Queensland prison system, what we call remand. I mean, this has been a huge issue in youth justice, adult sentencing across. Has a similar thing happened in the US in terms of it just shooting through the roof? And have you got any do you want to say anything about it?
Yeah, so it varies dramatically by place. So for years, California, half the people entering the prison system every year in California were going in because they failed either a probation or parole condition without a new arrest. They had not been arrested, they just turned up a dirty urine, or failed to report, or were living with the wrong person, or didn't, or were not at an address where they were supposed to be, or whatever. And California has made some significant headway in reducing that number. It used to be like 60%, it's now made around a third. So they made some big headway on that number. The problem is their impact on the prison population is not as much as it looks like, because they generally speaking don't stay as long.
But you're talking about preachers, not remand.
That's right. And part of my problem is I don't understand all of the different things that go into making a remand number.
Yeah.
So breaches include some remand, they include some, right, but not some not remand. So what is a remand? I don't fully understand what goes into producing that number. It's obviously an important number. One of the questions would be, what does it look like in New South Wales? What does it look like in Western Australia? What does it look like in other states, right? So, because if the same pattern is going on there, then something's happening sort of at the ground level. But if the pattern is different, it's just you guys decided to do that.
But your unsentenced prisoners are in jail, right, not prison?
Correct.
So-
Yeah.